Coming up on Choppers Politics.
Coming up on Choppers
Coming up on Choppers Politics.
Coming up on Choppers
Coming up
Politics.
on Choppers
Coming
Politics.
up on Choppers Politics.
Coming up on Choppers Politics. Oh, a wonderful pudding. Bob Cratchit said, and calmly too, that he regarded it as the greatest success achieved by Mrs. Cratchit since their marriage.
I'm Christopher Hope, the Telegraph's chief political correspondent, and this is a special edition of Choppers Politics. As you might have guessed from the start of this episode, this is a festive look at some of our best bits and bloopers on the podcast during the mad, crazy 12 months, otherwise known as 2020. And as it's Christmas, we'll try our best to keep the tone jovial. To say a lot has happened in the past 12 months would be the understatement of the decade. So settle in as we relive it all, starting way back in January, when the words social distancing were merely an instruction from worried parents at a 16th birthday party. Many years, well, then it was just 3.5 years, after first voting to leave, Britain finally exited the European Union, and we marked that occasion at a special event at, yes, you've guessed it, the Red Lion pub. Brexit has happened! I'm Christopher Hope, the Telegraph's chief political correspondent, coming to you, as ever, from the Red Lion pub, a stone's throw from the Houses of Parliament. And this evening I'm joined by a very special group of Telegraph subscribers! Alison Pearson, welcome to Chopper's Brexit Lock-in. Have you got a drink? Is that gin?
I think it's water.
What do you want in that glass?
A G&T would be lovely.
G&T?
Yeah. We had a lot of luck in a way because thank you so much. The
gin's arrived now.
Thank you. Ooh, I'll be all right now. I'll stop being very fluent in a minute. The Remainers overplayed their hand because if they'd swallowed their pride and voted for one of Theresa's marvellous Brexit in name onlys, they'd have been home and dry. But because they were holding out for the second referendum, they overplayed their hand, and thank God that they did. The high point, of course, December the 12th, 10 o'clock, exit poll.
That resolved Brexit.
Hallelujah. Sorry, I'm not. Sorry.
Is that allowed, Theo? It's after 11 o'clock.
Just what joy, absolute joy.
Yeah.
Reader wrote to me and said he jumped so high he'd broken his ceiling.
My next guest needs no introduction. He is Mr. Brexit himself. Please welcome Nigel Farage! Well, Nigel, welcome to Chopper's Brexit Lock-in. You've got a pint of London Pride.
I do. Normally, I meet you in the mornings.
I know.
And it's only coffee, normally.
It's a dry podcast normally, but not tonight.
But it's a fun evening, folks, isn't it?
No. Will you be staying up all night like Marc Francois, our guest earlier?
Marc Francois thinks he can out-party me. He's in for a bit of a shot.
That is a drinking challenge right here on this podcast.
I've no intention of going to bed at all, ever. No, but this really is. We're marking a moment in history. We are celebrating a victory. The people have beaten the establishment, and that's an amazing thing.
Do you worry about any uncertainty over the next few months and years will be blamed on you, won't it? You own that, Nigel. It's your fault that the GDP has gone down a bit before going up again.
I couldn't care less what people think. I've always done what I've done because I believe in it, and if people like it, that's terrific. If they don't, well, they go stuff themselves. I don't care. I think us making a success of Brexit is the end of this European empire. And if we can get to a place where we have a Europe of genuine friendship, free trade, cooperation, reciprocity, I actually would be very happy to be part of it. They have hijacked the word Europe. A European cooperation doesn't need flags, doesn't need anthems, doesn't need presidents, doesn't need police forces, doesn't need armies. So yes, I'm determined to do all I can to bring about the end of the European Union. Only then will the Brexit project be complete.
What are your plans for this year, Nigel, before you finish?
My plans for this year?
Yep.
I've got to get through the night first, dear boy.
What a night. I, for one, will not forget that. Also, earlier this year, the tables were turned on me when former Cabinet Minister David Gauke decided to seize the mic and ask me a series of questions of his own in front of 500 sixth formers.
Are these issues that you sort of pick because you think the readers will care about it, or do you personally, if you weren't writing for the Daily Telegraph, would you still care about the royal yachts?
I've been there for 16 years, and I think you do turn into a Telegraph person
You become a kind of creature of the newspaper. You interpret news information the way they think about things.
So do you think you've been there, so long? Let's imagine, hypothetically, that another newspaper,
The Guardian.
let's say The Guardian, which is, left-wing, Guardian, completely different attitudes to the Telegraph. They say, you're the star news reporter. We're going to double your salary. We want you to come to The Guardian. Yeah. Do you think it's something that you could do, and then you'd find other issues, and sort of you'd be promoting vegan food or something like that?
You said double your salary?
Yes.
So where do I sign?
Yeah.
Straight away, out the door. I think my career, if you're interested in this, is I used to work for Print Week, Construction News, and The Scotsman, The Herald, Business AM, before The Telegraph. I had joined in my 30s. And when you work for Print Week or Construction News, I've never printed anything in my life or know how to print anything or built anything, but you just learn what they care about, these readers, and you try and work out what they want to know about. So I would apply that discipline to The Guardian.
So it's a question of being professional, if you like.
Yeah, it's being professional. I mean, and it might be a good challenge to work for The Guardian for 6 months. I might do a job swap, fish out of water, see how it goes. It's a degree of representation. It's not democratic, but I find I've just got a lot of pride, and I just like to hold government and power to account. In the same way a backbench MP might feel they do towards when you're in power.
Well, you make the comparison with being a member of Parliament in terms of representing people and so on. Have you ever thought about becoming a member of Parliament? I think you'd make a very good MP.
Yeah, I have. I did think here and then. I mean, but it's never really come across. It strikes me very hard being an MP or becoming one, because unless you're lucky enough to be where you live, you have to go and invest in an area many miles away from where you live. That costs lots of money. You have to rent a house there and be in the community to know what they care about before you can stand. And I've got children, as you have, and it just would take me away from them at weekends. So I really admire people who give a lot, are able to put their family life to one side and be an MP.
Perhaps later on, could you imagine in a few years down the line, your children are a bit older, Laura, rather than being just a spectator, a commentator,
a participant.
Yeah, in the arena.
Get on the field of play. Yeah. Not a bad idea, Dave. Will you advise me?
Well, I'm not sure I'm
Chopper.
the right person. I'm not sure I'm the right person to advise you.
Well, I'm finally back in control of the mic now, listeners, and don't worry, if I try and stand for Parliament, I'll let you know first. Now, if we cast our minds back to February the 27th, it was otherwise an inauspicious day in Britain's life, but in our life, it was a big moment, a momentous one for this podcast. That's right, it was the day when we became Choppers Politics, instead of Choppers Brexit Podcast, because, well, Brexit was done, wasn't it? Honestly, was it? Hello, I'm Christopher Hope, the Telegraph's chief political correspondent, and welcome to Choppers Politics. After 161 episodes of Choppers Brexit Podcast, it's time for a rebrand. I know. It's not the most inventive name we could have chosen, and in fact, you lot came up with some very creative suggestions. Tom Pontin wanted Brew, that's Britain's relationship with Europe and the world. Lester's Lad wanted Chopper's Lobby Lounge, and Stephen wanted 2020 free. Do you get it? Yeah, not really. To be fair to us, though, even then, something fairly major was emerging to take control of most of our lives in 2020, and it wasn't Brexit. The pressing matter of this year has been undoubtedly coronavirus, which entered our lives here in Britain in March. In podcasting terms, it meant I had to leave behind my beloved Red Lion pub and grapple with the problems of recording remotely. No Red Lion pub, no frothy coffees, but a laptop, Skype, some fantastic guests, and hopefully some conversations that you may find interesting. My breakfasts aren't yet on a par with my usual haunt, the Red Lion pub.
Hello!
Hello, Mrs. Chopper, how are you?
Well, I'm very glad to be on your show.
Normally I'm in the pub at this time of day, but I'm at home now with you. Can you hear that, listeners? The clink of teacups, the slurp of much-needed caffeine, the happiness in my voice. We're back in the Red Lion pub. It's good to be home. We almost felt like we might be nearing another big return to the Red Lion pub, but no bacon and butties for me for a while. We're coming to you on day one of a second national lockdown in England. Well, I hope they're keeping my regular bar stool warm for me. Now, 2020 has been a year of firsts for many of us. The first Zoom quiz, probably the first socially distanced cup of coffee with our neighbours, the first time attempting to work from home with dogs and cats making noise in the background, while the doorbell rings with another Amazon package for the neighbour in the flat below. Yeah, more on that later. But on Choppers Politics, a big first for us was our first ever interview with the outgoing Labour leader, Jeremy Corbyn. How are you?
Absolutely fine. Keeping in good health, taking my daily exercise with the appropriate time ordained by the government, and making sure I get fresh air and good food, but also obviously concerned about people in my own community who are going through terrible levels of stress at the present time.
Well, we'll come on to that, and absolutely. But of course, you're 70 years old. Are you shielding, or are you walking out and about?
I'm keeping appropriate distance from people, but yes, I am cycling or walking around, but keeping an appropriate distance, and I try to keep myself as fit as I possibly can. I don't smoke, I don't drink, I'm a vegetarian, I eat fresh food, I grow my own vegetables. What else is there necessary in life for good health?
And you mentioned your vegetables. Our readers at the Telegraph and listeners to this podcast love the idea of your allotment. How is it going? Is it growing well?
It's fine. I haven't been there for the past 10 days or so because life has been incredibly busy dealing with CV, but it's in good order, ready to be planted out. It's been quite a cold spring, so I've delayed planting potatoes and other things, but it's all ready and fine, and it's been well manured. And the broad beans are growing fine, the garlic's growing fine, the onions are growing fine, and the fruit trees were all appropriately pruned by me in December and January, so they're in good order as well.
Good to talk about a non-coronavirus topic for at least 2 minutes, but we have to get back to that, I suppose. How do you feel about the Tory government using socialism to bail out capitalism?
Well, they've suddenly realised that 10 years of austerity have created a massively unequal and divided society, and that people who do important jobs like cleaning absolutely matter and are essential to our world. They also have recognised that the underfunding of the health service has been a disaster, and that we got into coronavirus crisis with 94% bed occupancy, obviously very little spare capacity to deal with the crisis that's upon us, and so they've had to pour money in to the NHS, and I'm pleased they have at last done that.
And if you were summarising your time as leader in one of your tweets that go viral, what would you say?
We can do better as a society than we've done, and we will.
And your political epitaph, the first line of your epitaph.
There is no epitaph yet. I'm still around. I'll let you know when the time comes.
And to us, it seemed that Labour leaders are like buses. You wait for years to speak to one of them on the podcast, and then two came along in a matter of weeks.
It's great to be back, Chris, in a slightly new capacity as leader of the Labour Party, which is a huge privilege, but it's nice to be back. It's been a while.
It certainly has. I was sitting above you watching your grilling of Boris today, and it struck me as very like a silent courtroom, and you're like Columbo or Ironside or someone just grilling this witness. Is that how it feels to you? It's so quiet.
It does feel very different, I have to say. There are so many things that are different. I mean, I started off the campaign to become leader of the Labour Party by dashing around the country, trying to see as many people as possible, and ended up 3 months later doing my sort of the first time I got to speak to the nation was on the day I got elected in as Labour leader, and I had to do that speech in my living room with a camera and a microphone. Yes. But equally, I think all of us assume PMQ's leader of the opposition, there'll be a lot of noise, particularly the early ones, when, frankly, there'll be a lot of Tories trying to put you off your pace. So we're now in this arena, which is much quieter. What I would say is the number of people who've contacted me to say this is so much better because you can actually put questions and get answers. So for a lot of people, it's a lot more refreshing because I think however much we like the rough and tumble of PMQs, for most of the public, they're pretty turned off by it.
Which previous Labour leader do you closely identify with?
Well, I keep being asked this, and I always say Attlee, but when we did one of the hustings, they said we couldn't go back to Attlee, so we had to choose someone else, and I chose Wilson. I'm quite reluctant to do this, which Labour leader do you most admire, because for the Labour Party, I'm really clear. The next 4 years is a period in which we've got to do a huge amount of work. We've got a mountain to climb. There's no pretending otherwise. And we, the team in place now, and along with our members and our movement, have got to do that hard work. And so we're going to be defined not by some past Labour leader. We're going to be defined by what we do over the next 4 years and whether we can climb that mountain. And so I don't look to cling to any past Labour leader. I learn from all of them, but I am not any of them.
But you're named after Labour leader Keir Hardie.
Yeah, you can't blame me for that, though. That was my mum and dad.
Well, I just wondered if you named any of your children Tony, Gordon, Ed or Jeremy.
Well, I haven't done, and I wouldn't do.
Sir Keir Starmer there, talking to us from his home. And it's safe to say that the switch to interviewing people from their front rooms hasn't always been quite so smooth.
Yeah, no, I tell you what it was. One of my family had successfully managed to turn off one of the boxes. So I just was checking back on the router. We're back online anyway.
I'm sorry about that. That was a hazard of someone just called me, and it cut out. It just cut it out. So let me. Are you recording now?
I've come back in now.
Hello. Hi, Keir.
Sorry, I'm not quite sure what happened there, but can you hear me all right now?
Yeah, much better.
Do you have any headphones on?
No.
Would you be able to do that for me if you've got a pair?
No, whatever I've got is in the kids' bedroom upstairs. Sorry about that. I'll get a pair for next time. But every time I get any, the kids nick them.
I'm the same. Yeah, you've got Keir Starmer.
Can I interrupt quickly? Sorry, it's Louisa, Francis. You've just got a little bit quieter. Has your mic moved slightly?
Oh,
the mic might have moved.
I hope that's not me waving my hands about, but it probably is. Sorry.
1 second. I think it's my wife. 1 second. Ellie. Yeah? Shut the door, babe. I'm on the radio.
Ed, have you got your computer on mute?
No.
Because I noticed earlier that your WhatsApps were pinging, and so you better make sure it doesn't do that, so that because that will spoil the podcast if any messages come through.
That's a good point. 1 second.
I'm going to
I can hear somebody on.
Yeah, 1 second. Guys! I'm terribly sorry about that. I've got a house full of teenagers.
Right. How old are they?
15, 17, 19.
Let me tell you, when they get to 35, it's not much better. Anyway, carry on.
Oh dear. I think most of us have managed to get the hang of working from home now, at least. Right, stay with us, listeners. We'll be back with more highlights from this year's Chopper Politics right after this.
It begins as a love story. Couples who meet as young activists, bonded in a fight against injustice.
We seem to have similar outlooks in life. He often made me feel very special.
It felt like we were in love. I remember it being quite magical. As far as I was concerned, we had a future together.
I fully did envisage my future with him.
But then, he starts acting strangely.
Suddenly there were secrets and there were inconsistencies and there were things that didn't make sense.
Then one day, he leaves.
I came home from work and I realised immediately that he'd gone.
Vanishes without a trace. And the reason why these men disappear is so disturbing, it's led to a formal apology from the state.
I never for a moment thought that it would be what it actually turned out to be.
This is Bed of Lies, the true story of one of the biggest scandals in recent British history, and the latest podcast from the Telegraph.
Talk about the Stasi in East Germany. That's not how we understand our society.
A tale that travels from the safety of a loving bedroom to the very heart of the law. Search for Bed of Lies wherever you're listening to this.
And we're back. Now, who remembers the days when your evening would begin with a glass of wine, a packet of pork scratchings, and the televised press briefing from number 10 Downing Street? And earlier this year, it was revealed that they were soon to become a more regular feature, with the government announcing that it was going to start staging White House-style daily press briefings on camera. Paul Harrison, the former press secretary to Theresa May, joined me to tell me why he thought it might not necessarily be a good plan.
I think one of the things that I'll be really sad if
this new televised process inadvertently leads to is kind of the death of the irreverent question, because sometimes asking something that seems a bit left field or even oddball gives you answers that kind of reveal something. And ultimately, I guess you know a lot better than I do, but the process of journalism, in part for lobby journalists, kind of reveal a bit of the politicians that make the decisions on all our behalves for readers. And, you know, there was a time when we were launching the childhood obesity strategy, sort of a variant of that, when I was in Number 10. And obviously there was a lot of focus on, you know, are the measures disproportionate? Are you depriving people of choice? All that kind of stuff. And we had this briefing and I was taking it, and there was a lot of chat about all the measures and whether they were too draconian or whatever. And eventually a member of the lobby, who I won't name, just looked at me and said, "Paul, has Theresa May ever even had a McDonald's?" And I saw there had been a bit of speculation in that morning's papers about, you know, the extent to which she's even never eaten any fast food, given her love of cooking. And so I actually asked her, and she sort of flashed a smile and said that she had, but the reason why was because she'd gone to officially open one in her constituency. So yeah, the death of the irreverent question, I think, like, genuinely would be a shame, because every now and again they do reveal something.
And from White House-style press briefings to the battle to be US president itself. This year we saw Joe Biden go head-to-head with the colossus that is Donald Trump. And so when Biden spoke in September about his concerns about peace in Northern Ireland and Brexit, it took on a new significance. Former Attorney General Geoffrey Cox gave me his verdict. Now, overnight we've had Joe Biden warning the UK in a tweet, maybe playing to his voters in the States, but there we are, saying that the UK must not jeopardise the Belfast Agreement, the Good Friday Agreement, with any deal. This doesn't, does it? Because the only way a hard border might be erected is if the EU do it, right? So it's the wrong target, is that right?
Well, I don't believe it's ever going to get to that, which is why, as I say, I'm very encouraged by the progress thus far and the discussions that the government is having. I don't believe the government really intends to use these things in the most flagrant breach. I think it intends to use it if the kind of unreasonable, and it would be unreasonable behaviour that the Prime Minister has identified, is committed. So I don't think we're ever going to get to that. But look, the problem about that argument, Chris, is that there are laws that apply to any border between two nations, between two customs territories in this case. Now, those laws are unavoidable, and we looked very closely at some of the mechanisms that might otherwise be implemented, and at the moment they would be very, very difficult to achieve. But I don't think we'll get there. I hope a common sense will break out in the European Union, and we will achieve a breakthrough. And if anybody can do it, this Prime Minister can.
But do you think Joe Biden's comments they should be aimed at the EU and the UK, not just
I think they should, yes. Yeah. I think they definitely should. I mean, I think the Democratic candidate is almost certainly, as you say, an election is coming. But I don't think that distant thunder from across the Atlantic helps any problems, as we saw from previous presidents who've made comments about our domestic affairs.
We've had Geoffrey Cox on this show a couple of times this year, and I'm always struck by his voice. What a magnificent sound. And the team even caught me attempting to imitate his fantastic timbre. Geoffrey Cox, thank you. Now, last year, you very kindly did a Christmas reading for us. I wonder if you do it again. Yes, of course. Yes, not quite the real thing, but I did my best. Perhaps a Skoda to his Rolls Royce. And I know that you all loved Geoffrey's reading at Christmas last year. So make sure you listen to the very end of this podcast for a similarly soothing seasonal reading. Now, sticking with the US theme, in autumn this year, I sat down to talk Trump with someone who knows him better than most people in Britain, Nigel Farage. Now, you heard Nigel dodge my question about what he'd be up to next when we spoke to him in January as Brexit was happening. And it turns out it involved a lot of trips to the US. Here's Nigel Farage debating if his friend Donald had the winning hand, or if the odds were stacked against him.
Right, let's do it. We could gossip all day, you see. No, but we really could, you know.
Nigel, the microphones are rolling. Do you want to say who you are for anyone who's been half asleep for the past decade?
Hello, I'm Nigel Farage, UK politician and broadcaster, and somebody who fell into the Trump orbit back in 2016, and I got involved with his presidential election campaign. I predicted he'd win. Everyone thought I was bonkers, but he did. So there I am, standing beneath the stage, and Trump's up there, and he says, ladies and gentlemen, I want to introduce you to a man who, against all odds, despite horrible name-calling, this goes on. Please welcome Mr. Nigel Farage. So up the steps I go, and Bush.
Mr. Nigel Farage.
It was, the message in a way wasn't difficult. The message was ignore the opinion polls. You know, on the day of the Brexit referendum, they showed Remain 10 points ahead. I must admit, even I got a bit taken in that day by that one. Ignore the opinion pollsters, ignore the media. You know, they're all on one side of this. This is all about who turns out and votes on the day.
Yeah, no, I get it. I'm hearing you. But I will say this.
Is who I wouldn't vote for in this election. I said, I wouldn't vote for Hillary Clinton if you paid me. And then I said, I wouldn't vote for Hillary Clinton if she paid me. So I hadn't said vote Trump, which would have been, I think that would have been wrong for me to do it, but I got round it that way. And this is an interesting point about Trump as a person that perhaps the haters will find difficult to believe. He then shook me by the hand. He said, thank you so much for doing this. He said, you will be my friend for life.
I mean, if Biden wins, will it be...
Well, if Biden wins fair and square, Biden wins fair and square.
And they'll accept that?
They won't like it. Yes, they will accept it. And then what will happen? I don't know. I mean, Trump, if he was to lose, I don't think Trump will take my advice and go and play golf on the best collection of golf courses any one individual's ever built up. I guess he'll launch Trump TV, or he'll do something. He'll do something. He can't help it. I mean, he's quite a workaholic, you know. He's pretty addicted to work. He's pretty addicted to striving. He's pretty addicted to... The drug for Trump is, it's not alcohol, it's not nicotine, it's not any of those things, it's success. That's what Trump likes. So if it's fair and square, the country will accept it. There is just this one potential nightmare scenario, as I say, which is a Trump win on the day, a big win on the day, and then we get a lot of postal votes counted. I'm told, and I'm studying this more deeply, but I'm told there are some states who are handling postal voting well by actually getting names and addresses. There are other states just mailing them out. So there is the potential for the biggest constitutional row in modern times, which could be accompanied by some seriously unpleasant things happening on the street. I pray we don't get into that.
Clearly, soothsaying isn't one of Nigel Farage's many talents. But still, it was fascinating to get an insight into the real Donald Trump, a man who might no longer be president in a few weeks' time, but will still loom large on the international scene, I'm sure. And he may even stand for president next time. Now, you never hear me say this, listeners, heaven forbid, but it has been said that sometimes politicians can be, well, a little bit dull. Trotting out the same lines, never giving away too much of their personality. But here on Choppers Politics, the relaxed environment tends to lend itself to politicians getting a bit, well, animated. Now, we always encourage passion, so please enjoy a conversation with the Conservative MP Philip Davies, Culture Committee member, getting a bit carried away when talking about the BBC. Are you looking forward to your invitation to present Have I Got News For You, Philip Davies? Because they want to try and... They're so worried about left-wing bias on comedy programmes.
Well, the BBC's got a left-wing bias, not just on comedy programmes, it's on their political programmes as well. They've got BBC bias everywhere. I think it may be a step too far expecting that they're going to call me in to present anything on the BBC, to be fair.
Isn't the case, Philip Davies, that this always happens when a party's been in power for over, say, 8 years? Certainly in the late 80s, there were similar angst issues about the Tories and the BBC. And don't forget Alistair Campbell in the early part of this century over Iraq. So isn't it the case that the party in power is always interrogated more? And that's why it feels like there's bias against the government from comedy or politics or wherever.
Yeah, but it's not just biased against the government. It's about Brexit. It's all the sort of politically correct stuff as well that we get shoved down our throats by the BBC every 5 minutes. So it's not just about the government. This is just a more general sort of left-wing, politically correct organisation with a North London outlook that is basically out of tune with the rest of the country. And they're spending £100 million supposedly on diversity. The only diversity the BBC needs is actually some people with different opinions and don't have this sort of metropolitan left-wing, lentil-eating, sandal-wearing, beard-growing group of people that they seem to just have employed at the BBC. I mean, they need to get out more. That's what I always tell people at the BBC. Get out more, get out into the regions a bit more and find out that people don't share that politically correct view of the world.
I can't say I'm that much of a fan of lentils either, although I'm not sure I feel as strongly about those who eat them as Philip. Now, Choppers Politics won't be complete without interviews with big personalities, and 2020 was no exception. Now, for a brief, happy moment in time in October, I was back in the Red Lion pub, and my guest joining me for a morning coffee was controversial actor and anti-woke, self-styled freedom fighter Lawrence Fox, as he launched his newly formed Reclaim Party. Welcome to the podcast, Lawrence. Welcome to the Red Lion pub.
Thank you very much.
You've been spotted here recently drinking with Tory MPs. Why is this?
Well, I'll tell you something I've noticed about politics. There are some similarities between politics and showbiz in terms of the quantities of beer consumed by the relative participants. One has to reclaim the conversation, the ability to have the conversation, and the only way to have a decent conversation is in a reasoned way, multifaceted way, instead of this simple univariant analysis that the hard lefty wokey chums that I love so much are insisting that we talk.
At what point did you want to start a party? When did this moment come to you?
It's an evolutionary aspect, isn't it? So I did Question Time. I think it was my first example of saying something that I genuinely felt and didn't think was in any way controversial.
The Meghan Markle question you had there.
She has been torn to pieces.
It's not racism.
It absolutely
is. We're the most tolerant, lovely country in Europe. It's so easy to throw the charge of racism at everybody, and it's really starting to get boring.
What worries me about your comment is you are a white privileged male who has no experience in this.
I mean,
I can't help what I am. I was born like this. It's an immutable characteristic. So to call me a white privileged male is to be racist. You're being racist. The Meghan Markle question, who would be the best Labour leader? I mean, all of it essentially was I was hopping around the minefield like you wouldn't believe. It was hilarious. So yeah, the acorn possibly got put in the ground after the Question Time explosion. Then I think, okay, movement. Shall I form a movement? And we can go and bash on the door of the government and really mess with them and tell them, well, not mess with them, that's not fair, hold them to account. And then I thought, movement. And then I look around and I see these amazing movements that are just fabulous. And I go, is the government going to move as a result of a movement? Or is the government going to move at the threat of you taking a couple of their votes away from them? What's more likely? So then I think, got to be done.
The latter. It'll be very interesting to find out what Lawrence Fox gets up to in 2021. And of course, personalities don't get much bigger than Good Morning Britain host Piers Morgan, who's been merrily whipping up a Twitter storm during the pandemic. We settled down to a Zoom chat, him in a very grand-looking house and me in my living room, as he answered some of your questions. Benjamin Jackson asked, will Donald Trump attend Joe Biden's inauguration ceremony in January?
Well, I hope he will. I think what's going on now is a bit pathetic and sad, honestly. I think what may be behind it is this situation in Georgia where both their Senate places are up for grabs, one Republican, one Democrat. And I think that Trump's been told by the Republican hierarchy, keep riling up the base for the next few weeks because we need people to vote Republican in Georgia to get control of the Senate. And I think that's what may be behind it. But it looks like the ultimate bad loser.
Yeah.
And it's damaging to America's reputation for democracy, ferocious democracy. But when you win, you win. When you lose, and the loser concedes. And I hope he concedes sooner rather than later. I wrote him an open letter begging him to concede and do the right thing. I don't think he's going to. But I hope he does. And I hope when the Georgia reruns are done in early January that Trump turns up at the inauguration and wishes Biden all the best in the world for success for America and fellow Americans.
Bernie asks, why don't you admit to being right-wing, Piers Morgan?
Because I'm not right-wing.
Aren't you virtue signalling by pretending to be left-wing or liberal? Aren't you a fake lefty? I think is Bernie's question.
No, I'm a voice of common sense. I'm very centrist. I don't hate the right and I don't hate the left.
Okay.
But I don't categorise myself as either. I'm basically a journalist. All journalists ought to be fairly central, really. I'd rather just be a journalist.
Yeah, 3 cheers for that. Ian Fletcher asks, what's your least controversial opinion, Piers Morgan?
My least controversial opinion, that ambrosia cream rice is one of the most underrated foodstuffs in the world.
And just last one from me. What's your advice to Telegraph readers, listeners to this podcast, about navigating this woke world, which they might find quite scary?
Stand up, resist, don't bow to it. A lot of your listeners will be in positions of power who may be susceptible to pressure from the wokies on social media to cancel employees or, to virtue signal in some grotesque manner just to please them. Don't do it. Don't do it. Run your company with integrity. Run your company with your own values. Make sure they're good values. Don't bow to the mob. The more we don't bow to the mob, the less effective the mob will be.
Well, that's it from me, listeners. I hope you've enjoyed our look back at Westminster, seen through the eyes of a chopper's politics in 2020. There's obviously so much more we couldn't squeeze in. And of course, you can always listen back to any of our 205 other episodes. That's more than 100 hours of me witching on about politics with some of Westminster's biggest names. What could be better? And before we go, please enjoy one last example of my guests finding it impossible to deal with technical changes or speaking to me over the internet. I give you Joy Morrissey and Richard Holden, 2 new Tory MPs celebrating a year in their roles. They might be very good at their jobs, but they can't speak in unison. That was great, both. Do you mind just saying after me, coming up on Chopper's Politics together, joined across the internet? Is that okay with you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sure.
Okay, I'll count you in on 3. So, 1, 2, 3.
Coming up on Chopper's
Politics.
No.
Joy, after 3. Yeah. 1, 2, 3, speak.
Okay.
Come on, Joy.
Here we go. Last go.
This.
Final go, or Louisa will get cross. Final go. 1, 2, 3.
Coming up on Chopper's Politics.
Louisa, I can't work these people.
It'll be the internet connections. No one's at fault.
Thank you, Louisa.
Oh, is it? I'll try and leave a second gap then.
Yes.
And start with Joy. Okay, that's fine.
This is going on our outtakes, by the way, for our annual show. Here we go. 1, 2, 3.
Coming up
on Chopper's Politics.
It's not going to work, is it?
That was a disaster.
As good an example as any that this isn't as easy as it looks. Now, thanks to my marvellous guests on the podcast this year. If you've got a favourite, do get in touch and let me know. Email me, chopperspolitics@telegraph.co.uk, or tweet us at chopperspodcast. Thank you as ever to my producers. That's Louisa Wells, Elliot Lampitt, and Theo Luludis. They make this podcast happen and me sound brilliant. Thank you to them all. I'm Christopher Hope, the Telegraph's chief political correspondent, and this is me coughing. Sorry, Elliot. Will Elliot get all this? Yes. I miss his cheery face, particularly at Christmas. He used to bring croissants to the pub. And if you then decide to stay a subscriber, after your 30 days, sorry. I don't know, I'm so sick of this paragraph. What I say, here's a message from our wonderful producer, Louisa Wells, and you can say that wonderful. Okay, well, let's go. Thank you to my producers, Louisa Wells, Theo Ludis. Thank you to my producers, Louisa Wells, Theo Ludis, Lulu. Can she get married soon to someone called Smith? Flipping heck. Thank you to my producers, Louisa Wells, Theo Ludis, and Elliot Lampitt. Round of applause. And thanks, of course, to you for listening. Now, since we launched this podcast in March 2017, it's been listened to or downloaded 4.5 million times. We have listeners all over the world, from here in the UK to a couple of listeners in Greenland, Somalia, the Falklands and Iraq. There you go. So wherever you are, happy Christmas. Cheerio! And I leave you with the dulcet tones of Geoffrey Cox.
The Cratchits Eat Christmas Dinner, from A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens. There never was such a goose. Bob said he didn't believe there ever was such a goose cooked. Its tenderness and flavour, size and cheapness were the themes of universal admiration. Eked out by apple sauce and mashed potatoes, it was a sufficient dinner for the whole family. Indeed, as Mrs. Cratchit said with great delight, surveying one small atom of a bone upon the dish, they hadn't ate it all at last. Yet everyone had had enough, and the youngest Cratchits, in particular, were steeped in sage and onion to the eyebrows. But now, the plates being changed by Miss Belinda, Mrs. Cratchit left the room alone, too nervous to bear witnesses, to take the pudding up and bring it in. Suppose it should not be done enough. Suppose it should break in turning out. Suppose somebody should have got over the wall of the backyard and stolen it, while they were merry with the goose, a supposition at which the two young Cratchits became livid. All sorts of horrors were supposed. Hullo! A great deal of steam. The pudding was out of the copper, a smell like a washing day. That was the cloth. A smell like an eating house and a pastry cook's next door to each other, with a laundress's next door to that. That was the pudding. In half a minute Mrs. Cratchit entered, flushed but smiling proudly, with the pudding like a speckled cannonball, so hard and firm, blazing in half a quartern of ignited brandy, and bedight with Christmas holly stuck into the top. Oh, a wonderful pudding! Bob Cratchit said, and calmly too, that he regarded it as the greatest success achieved by Mrs. Cratchit since their marriage. Mrs. Cratchit said that now the weight was off her mind, she would confess she had had her doubts about the quantity of flour. Everybody had something to say about it, but nobody said or thought it was at all a small pudding for a large family. It would have been flat heresy to do so. Any Cratchit would have blushed to hint at such a thing. At last, the dinner was all done, the cloth was cleared, the hearth swept, and the fire made up. The compound in the jug being tasted and considered perfect, apples and oranges were put upon the table, and a shovelful of chestnuts on the fire. Then all the Cratchit family drew round the hearth, in what Bob Cratchit called a circle, meaning half a one, and at Bob Cratchit's elbow stood the family display of glass, 2 tumblers and a custard cup without a handle. These held the hot stuff from the jug, however, as well as golden goblets would have done, and Bob served it out with beaming looks, while the chestnuts on the fire sputtered and cracked noisily. Then Bob proposed, "A Merry Christmas to us all, my dears. God bless us," which all the family re-echoed. "God bless us, every one," said Tiny Tim, the last of all.